All right, we have Amber Tebow and Marcus Serta joining us remotely. I will call the meeting of the Wednesday, August 28th, 2024 Essex Junction City Council to order. Marcus, maybe you can't hear me? I don't want that close to something.
So I can hear you, but you're at a distance where I could hear Elaine more clearly.
Yeah, I was just corrected.
Thank
Is that
you.
better? Can barely see the screen over the mic, but all right. Any agenda additions or changes?
Yes, we will be tabling the executive session, and then we do have some amendments to the August 14th minutes, so I think we want to pull those out of consent.
Okay. Is there 5G?
Yep.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll move we approve the agenda as amended.
Great. Second.
Second.
Tim seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes. Great. Going to read this and then we'll move on to public to be heard. In previous city council meetings, members of the public had made racist and anti-Semitic comments. These comments have disrupted presentations and were made during the public comment period. The city council does not condone such language and opposes it. Such comments are deeply harmful and are entirely inconsistent with our community's values. While it is not possible to prevent harmful speech during public comments, the council will continue to condemn such comments publicly. Public to be heard is a portion of the meeting where members of the public can bring comments or concerns to the city council. These can be items that we're going to talk about tonight that are on the agenda or items that are not. Amber, did you have something? No? Okay.
I'm all set. I was just going to point out that we weren't seeing the Town Meeting TV feed, but we are seeing it now.
Okay, great. I don't see anyone in the room for this, so we will go right online to Risa Marin. Hi.
Thank you. Hi. I'm lowering my hand. Otherwise, I forget and fall on your head.
Thank you.
I have three quick things. The first one, I know you've heard from me several times about CVE. I didn't want to send through another note. I just wanted to make sure it was brought to your attention that during the fair, they're charging $70 per day for the use of a scooter and $25 per day for use of a wheelchair, which is not very community-minded, is not very DEI-minded, is not very assistive-minded, and just further makes them seem like a business. So that's my CVE thing. I have two other quick points. The first is, in reading through the meeting packet, I see that Brad Luck created a purpose statement for the Rec Advisory Committee. And it seems to me that the director of a department should not be providing a purpose statement for an advisory committee for that department, that the very definition of that is a conflict of interest. And my second point about this purpose statement is item number 2 mentions that the purpose of the RAC is to assist with functions and everything. The purpose of a rec advisory committee is not to provide unpaid labor for any department. And it's also not the purpose of a rec advisory committee to be finding other unpaid labor. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other hands. I am wondering on the CVE comment if that's simply a pass-through of their costs for renting that equipment, but I don't know. So not seeing any other hands online or anyone in the room, we'll move on to the first business item. Discussion on development of a stormwater utility. We have Chelsea Mendigo here, Stormwater Superintendent.
Close, water quality.
Water quality, sorry, stormwater. What did I, I'm sorry.
It doesn't encompass stormwater.
No, it does. Apologies.
Okay, so I am going to get the presentation up and running here.
can start talking in general.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, there was a memo that accompanied this presentation, so I want to touch on a few aspects in the memo because they're not necessarily in the presentation.
Okay.
And it's really just to give a background for some of the council members that were not here during the budget formation for the current fiscal year end, 25. So,
Pardon me, sorry to interrupt.
yes.
I am struggling to hear you, Chelsea, and I want to be able to hear you clearly.
Oh, okay, I see. Right, Raj thought this was awkward.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now, Marcus?
Yes, clearly. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Where was I going to start? So prior to separating from the town of Essex, the capital for stormwater in the city was largely funded through the Town of Essex Stormwater Capital Fund. Even though we had separate, we have our separate stormwater permits and requirements, it's all watershed based and we share the same watershed. So given that we were at that point moving towards a merged community, it made sense that that's where a lot of the funding came. So one outcome of separating is that we lost funding, source for stormwater capital, a designated source, I should say. Also, the general fund for the town held some of our stormwater requirements for like permit fees, for example, in their general fund. And so when we separated and became a city, that all became one, our first time that we had one budget under the city umbrella for stormwater. And so when I presented the budgets this past winter, we had two budgets. One was a bare bones budget, which we're operating right now, where stormwater sat in the general fund. And it's really just keeping us in compliance. It's not moving us forward towards implementing our permit requirements, where that does have a deadline for some of it. And like 2035, I believe, for some projects. And then the other one that was formed was what it would look like to continue to move forward on our stormwater projects in permit implementation. And that's where we would use utility to help get us there. And so at that time, you all gave me the direction to continue to move forward. So that's what we've been doing the past 9 months. We hired a firm named Raftellus, who specializes in utility formation across the United States. And so now I'll just go into my presentation and give the update on where the utility's at. And down arrow. Oh, because it's PDF. Gotcha. Okay. So here's the agenda of what I'll be going over. What is stormwater in general? How are we currently funding it, which I sort of just touched on. What stormwater utility is, how we calculated the fees, and what the draft rates are looking like to be for the city. So stormwater, as a reminder, is water that's created by rainwater and snowmelt. And so when that stormwater hits a hard surface, the industry term is called impervious surface or impervious area. So something like pavement or rooftop, that stormwater is going to run off, and with it take any pollutants that are on those hard surfaces. So for stormwater management, we have to manage that runoff coming off of those hard surfaces to prevent pollution and ensure safety. And so we have a state mandated permit. It's called a Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4 for short. And it tasks us to reduce the amount of stormwater runoff entering our local waterways and Lake Champlain. And there's 13 communities in the state that have to do this. And it's all population based. So currently, how we fund stormwater in the city is through the general fund, which we all know is based on property taxes. But the disadvantage of that is we're competing for funding now, especially with the general fund capital. That's where stormwater at this point in time is being funded. And then also tax exempt properties do not contribute. So what is a stormwater utility? It's a way to provide a fair and equitable and stable source of funding for stormwater management. And it's a fee-based system, just like you would have for water and sewer, but it's based on the demand your property would create on the city's stormwater infrastructure. So because we can't meter stormwater, they do an assessment, or a consultant will do assessment, and it's based on something called the total impervious area. So that total hard surface that you have on your property. This is a slide explaining or showing what communities already have established utilities. So this isn't something new in our area. These are all, again, communities that also have stormwater requirements, state stormwater requirements, just like us. You can see that some have been established as far back as 2005 and as most recent as 2021. So now we're going to spend a few slides talking about the impervious area and what this looks like for parcels in the city. So all these examples and imagery you'll see are actual parcels in the city. So again, the impervious area, the technical definition is a developed area of land that significantly prevents or impedes stormwater from going into the soil. So you can see in this example, anything that's highlighted in blue is considered impervious areas. So in this example, the rooftop in the parking lot. So the reason why you use impervious area is because it's actually industry standard. That's what most stormwater utilities, how they are developed. It's equitable because it's all based on how much of an impact you're having on the infrastructure. And then it's also allowing for a dedicated and stable source of funding. So how is this determined? How to build based on impervious area? So it's a unit called Equivalent Residential Unit, or ERU for short. And here's another example where in this example, you can see the driveway and the sidewalk and even the back deck. Those are all considered impervious area. And so typically, a single family home is considered one ERU. And then non-single family homes are calculated based on the measured impervious area. And in the city, it is gonna, single family homes are gonna also include duplex and triplex properties. So this is just a follow-up slide showing how you categorize the various property types in the city. And typically there's single family home, multiple family residence, non-residential, and other. But in the city, we've simplified it, and it's gonna be just single family home and non-residential. And the utility. So then we take that information on how many ERUs there are, what it's defined as, and we also take the revenue requirements, what we need for staffing, permit requirement, capital needs, and that's all put into a financial model that the consultant developed to calculate what this ERU rate's gonna be. So right now, the current draft rate is looking to be $75 to $80 per equivalent unit ERU, and that's an annual rate for a single family home. So we're looking to use the utility, the current utility billing system, which goes out 3 times a year on your water and sewer bills. We would just be adding the stormwater fee on that. And so for a typical single family home, it'd be about $25 per utility bill that you'd get. That's the current rate. Also, I realized I didn't put this on a slide, but we're targeting to have that first bill go out in the first bill for 2025, which is February of 2025. So here are some examples that we can walk through of different parcels in the city. So we've kind of gone over single family home a couple times, but the assessment from the consultant found that the median impervious area for a single family home is 2,967 square feet. So that's what one ERU is going to equal. So then you take that number and you look at the other parcels, so non-single family homes. So the example here is commercial property. That has been found to have 57,785 square feet. So you take that impervious area number and you divide it by the 2,967, and that's how you develop 19 equivalent units for the commercial property. And you can see that that's the fee associated, 19 times 75. And so you do the same for each parcel in the city. Here's another example of a tax-exempt property in the city and how we would establish the number of ERUs. Even though I said the benefit of a utility is that everyone pays, there are 2 exceptions in the city. One is going to be Global Foundries. They are a multi-sector general permit site, and all of their stormwater is treated on their own site, going directly to the Winooski River, and does not touch any city infrastructure or right-of-way. So they are exempt from our utility. They're also exempt from the town of Williston's utility because their Williston campus falls into the same stormwater management. The other parcels that are exempt, there's 3 of them, and they are because they're subject to required agricultural practices by the state of Vermont. And that was an act that was established last year that directed municipalities or prevented municipalities from assessing a stormwater fee for those properties. With all that being said, we are developing a credit manual that will be for non-single family homes, and that will allow you to get credit towards your stormwater fee that has been assessed up to 50%. It's still in the draft phase, but right now we're modeling off of what other communities have done surrounding utilities. And so you can get credits for stormwater treatment practices that you have working on your property, stormwater education, and then if you have other stormwater permit compliance requirements, you can apply for a credit. And then because of that, we have incorporated in the financial model the assumption that some people will apply for credits. Generally, when talking with other communities, the properties that do apply for credits is surprisingly low. But we still went with what industry standard is right now for credit manuals, and that's a 2% reduction assumed, and that's already calculated in the rate, the draft rate. That is it. We are putting more information. We created a landing page under this department stormwater utility where there'll be more up-to-date information. And we'll also be we'll have to, in order to, I didn't put a slide on this either, but it is in the memo. In order to have the stormwater utility be established, we have to create a stormwater utility ordinance. So that we'll have to go through the public hearing process. And we do plan on having more individualized meetings with parcels that have a high equivalent unit rate drafted right now. So say if it's like, for example, if there was 19, that's I don't know if that's the right, we haven't determined the cutoff rate, but there's some that I've seen that are up to towards 40, so we'll probably meet with those folks individually to go over the fee and get any input.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Yep.
Regina, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not have
anything
anything to add. That was quite thorough.
Yes. Couple quick questions, I guess, Chelsea.
Yeah.
So when you say nonprofits, state, federal property, railroad, are those exempt still, or are they part of the, would they be?
The state, no, but I think railroad might be.
And not we have,
The
we have a federal property, don't we?
We do not.
That
I don't think.
it's not a federal program across the street.
Oh, it is. Yep. They will be charged.
Okay. But the state doesn't. State doesn't pay.
No, the state does pay.
The state does pay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
I'm just saying railroad. I think
oh,
the railroad right of way is not.
Okay. There's one other question, but I cannot remember. Elena, do you have anything?
Yeah, Chelsea, that was a really thorough presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
About how many parcels are there that you anticipate to be over the on the larger side, like you were talking about?
I don't have an exact amount. The consulting firm hasn't shared the final spreadsheet where that's been sorted. We're trying to, as much as possible, match it with current utility accounts, so that there was a lot of questions because some of those have a little bit of a strange way they're billed, especially for water. So we had to sort some of that out and figure out how we were going to do that part. But it's definitely less than a quarter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has there been any advance notification that we're going through this process and that it will likely result in a fee?
Not yet. This is the kickoff, really. It took us a while to get all this organized, and we're using this as the kickoff and making a outreach plan moving forward here.
Okay. And is this the same process? A while ago, there was a law passed, I think it's like the 8-acre rule, or it's a stormwater rule for parcels that have a lot of
3 acre.
3-acre
Yep.
rule. Is that what this is to address, or are we doing this separately to address the funding, moving it out of the general fund into a utility?
The second.
The second, okay.
We're not addressing any 3 acre permits. The city does not have any in our own buildings that we own, and we have chosen not to partner with any of the 3 acre sites,
Okay.
because that changes where our target is for our phosphorus removal, which is one of our requirements. So if we were to partner with one of those, it would have to be a really strong benefit for the city, because it moves our needle even further. The reach is further up for how much phosphorus we have to remove. But there will be ways for those parcels, once they put in stormwater infrastructure, to receive credit on their fee.
Okay, okay. I one more question, sorry. So,
Sorry, can I just add to that?
Please.
Answer? So, the stormwater permitting system is pretty complex, I'd say, in that there are multiple different stormwater permits and entities that have to follow the regulations. So the 3 acre permit is really put into place for larger properties, mostly that have already been developed pre-stormwater regulations for private development. And so those folks are now sort of being brought into that system, and they really will need to address their stormwater in and of themselves. And in fact, we've been hearing from CVE, they are one of those people, and it's going to be a big cost to them. The stormwater that we have to manage is much bigger and beyond those individual parcels, and have been a cost and a requirement for us for quite some time. So we are just trying to figure out how to properly fund that work that we are required to do from the municipal requirement of stormwater management, if that helps.
no, that really does.
Yeah.
So then my last question is, if the purpose of the utility creation is to have a stable funding source going forward, so are we removing from the general fund going forward what we're already collecting for that? Because you started out by saying that funding is in the general fund. So is it, first of all, it's being moved out of that, and then second of all, is the property tax no longer going to be a resource of that funding, and it's just going to come from the fees? Okay, so you're nodding. So then, does that mean that the impact on our tax rate will lower because we'll be paying for that through a separate mechanism?
Yes, but I don't know, and maybe, I know Jess is on the call. I don't know that it's not gonna be till the next fiscal year, because we will have funded the general fund until we start collecting those fees in February.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like
She is
what
there.
what it looks like on the tax bill
Yeah.
if we're removing a fairly large amount of funding out of the general fund into a utility.
But it's probably pretty safe to assume it's not a one-to-one relationship. You're paying $80 for your ERU single-family home, you may not expect to see an $80 reduction
Yeah,
in your property tax.
I think so.
Okay,
That's probably fair to say.
okay.
Yeah.
I would hate to have to predict that, but,
Yeah.
you know, as an extension, one shouldn't expect that, but a reduction nonetheless. Okay.
That wasn't where I was going,
No,
but I
but, yeah.
appreciate your saying that.
Just kind of, I just figured someone would have that question. Why am I not seeing
Probably.
the $80 reduction
Yep.
right off the bat? But
Jess, just anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, so the only other thing I would add is that, like any enterprise fund, the city will have to pay the enterprise fund as well. So the general fund will be paying similar fees to this enterprise fund, exactly like we do with water, wastewater, and sanitation now.
Okay. Yeah, Marcus? Yeah, the glare is.
You're on mute, Marcus.
Trying to manipulate too many things. So going back to that last, I've got a few questions, so I apologize. But going back to that last thing, just so that I understand this. So if all things remain equal, when we get to the point that this is included in the budget, this is going to be a line item not in the general fund, but it's going to be in the enterprise fund. But I just want to understand if this fee is to cover the expense, which we have already identified in the budget and currently cover through the general fund, why isn't it 1-to-1? I guess I'm like to understand that a little bit better. To what you said, Raj, I just want to understand, like, why is
I
that
can
number?
explain my thinking, but
Yeah.
this is targeting. This will impact properties that don't currently pay property tax.
Yeah.
So from that skews the calculation for somebody for having a 1-to-1 relationship with their fee right there. That's the main one for me. Already the numbers are different then. And my understanding was that this might cover, we were breaking even in a sense, and this is my understanding, correct me, but we were sort of breaking even with what we're doing in the stormwater area through the general fund, but the intention here is to get ahead and to actually
Exactly.
have an impact. So potentially spending more where we should be in stormwater versus what we're doing now. So those were my assumptions in the 1-to-1, in my 1-to-1 comment, but I don't know.
We've been coasting since I became water quality superintendent, and no longer was I filling the role of stormwater coordinator. So, for 3 years now.
Yeah, and my answer on the 1-to-1 too is just that we have the FY25 budget that we're working in right now. We contemplated a move to the stormwater utility, but really it's will really like all come into play for us in FY26, and just generally the budget might go up. So that's really just where I'm coming from, in the sense that once this all comes into play, it will probably be a different dollar amount.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarity. That helps from that particular standpoint. And then, having more payers in the process, as you said, the non-taxpayers into that process adds, a positive in the other direction too. So I think hopefully, it'll be good for everybody. The multi-family residential units. So as an example, if you're painting the picture, like the new properties that are going along Park Street, for instance. So are they paying the non-residential then? Is that how we've structured that? I'm sorry if I'm...
Yes.
Okay. For a property owner, is it possible to, like right now I have an asphalt driveway. If I remove the asphalt driveway completely and turn it into a gravel driveway so it's not impervious, could I impact my impact on stormwater and therefore impact my financial responsibility then?
Right now, the credit manual is only going to be geared to the non-single family homes. So the answer is no for the start.
Okay. All right. Then the other thing that I'll ask is, again, as we look at this impervious surface, how often is this going to be reviewed? Because obviously there's going to be new construction, there's going to be all kinds of potential changes in properties, commercial or otherwise, here in the city. How often is this going to be looked at and reviewed in order to know whether or not we need to change, you know, how many ERUs a potential property is going to be required to pay?
I don't have the answer to that quite yet. We haven't received that recommendation for future maintenance from the consultant yet. But I will have it for a future meeting.
You mentioned the fact that there are going to be stormwater ordinances, there are going to be stormwater rules that are going to come down that we're going to be talking about in the future. Do we address some of this currently? So some of the new projects that are coming online, is there some level of stormwater mitigation that's required on these, or are we just don't have them?
We do have them in the land development code. However, there is room for improvement because a lot of the parcels in the city are so small. The state only regulates a half acre of impervious surface, and most of the projects that are coming through are 0.49 acres of impervious surface, so they skirt all the state requirements. So we need to do some work on the land development code, but the first step is the stormwater utility ordinance, and then focus on improving the land development code.
Another question, my last question, just to understand the perspective, talking a little bit about ERUs. Again, let's just say that the expense or what the line item we're trying to achieve in order to manage the stormwater utility and be prepared for future capital and all that, if it remains equal, yet development continues within the city, is it possible that the ERU numbers go up and therefore the general cost of an ERU could potentially go down depending on the level of development if the development outpaces the expenses?
Not entirely sure. One issue we have is also our aging infrastructure that is failing pretty fast and not easy to repair because most of these failed culverts are behind folks' homes, and that is proving to be a real challenge. So yeah, it's not just new things we have to build, it's maintaining our aging infrastructure too.
Yeah, we'll put some more thought to that, Marcus.
Yeah.
That's a really great question, because theoretically, the answer should be yes. We have a set system here. We have 4.6 square miles in the city. And the more users you have within that system, that same infrastructure system, theoretically, the costs would go down. But we have to really take a look at that. And Chelsea is right, that infrastructure being quite old is a big factor in that. And we're also operating in a time where a lot of that needs to be replaced, and looking at that from the capital planning side of things. So, but awesome question, and we'll think on that.
I mean, I think, just to jump in for a second on that thought, I'm thinking of the planned development or the proposed thought of development down Park Street, which is largely just simply transitioning impervious surface for impervious surface.
Right.
It seems like, some of this will be just triggering new development, and new COs will trigger new additions to the list, but will they actually be a change from what happened before? Because if it doesn't sort of matter what the height and the, even though 40 apartments has a different impact on this, we're talking about stormwater, we're not talking about sewage.
Yeah.
So it sounds like if we're starting with impervious surface and we're just changing the nature of the impervious surface, there probably wouldn't be much of a change.
Yeah, that's a good point, because as far for stormwater and impervious surface, the city is pretty much already all developed.
Right.
and it is almost
It'd be very hard to
one-for-one
find
replacement.
Maybe, very small numbers of little micro
Yeah.
areas where it was transitioned. Just trying to think this through out loud for people too, like. All right, Amber.
I have two quick questions. One, I assume that when you identified those properties that were exempt, you did not mention CVE, so I'm gathering that they are not exempt from this.
Correct.
And the second question is the credits. So that's something that folks would have to apply for. It's not an automatic.
Correct. There's be applications on the city website that they would then submit to me for approval.
Okay. Thanks, Chelsea.
My questions have been answered.
Okay.
So I'm good at this point.
Great. Anything follow-up wise, anyone? Chelsea, do you have anything based on all these questions that you wanted to add, or Regina? No?
This won't be the last time I'm visiting you about the utility before we finalize it.
No, I understand.
yeah.
No, I understand totally, and I appreciate that.
No, I think this is a good primer to begin the conversation of where we're at and where we're going.
I'll just echo what Elaine said. It was a very complete presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Really, I think helps get the conversation going, and I look forward to what's coming next. And I just, before you go, just want to give anyone online an opportunity to ask a question of the council or make a comment on this. I'm not seeing anyone in the room, so we'll go right to online. So if there's anybody online, we'll give it a few moments here. Just raise your hand. I'm not seeing anyone. So Chelsea, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Chelsea. Great job.
And moving on to 5B, Department Head Brief, Chris Ewan, Community Development Director. Welcome.
Hi, Chris.
So, yeah, I'm happy to spend 10 to 15 minutes to go over some of what the Community Development Department has achieved over the last 6 months and what we're looking forward to in the months ahead. Actually, I would say for the 6-month look back that I have in the memo, I've actually gone back a little bit beyond 6 months. Some of this was more at the beginning of 2024. So going over some of the items that are on there, one of the first things that we did in 2024 was an expansion of the neighborhood development area designation. This is a state designation that provides some state permitting exemptions for qualified mixed income housing, tax benefits, and some other appeal limitations for these developments. These are meant to encourage developers and municipalities to help increase the creation of new homes within walking distance of jobs and services. So, yeah, we were able to successfully petition the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to extend the NDA designation along the Pearl Street corridor from about School Street to Warner Avenue. I would mention that the whole designation program has been changed since the last legislative session, but the current designations stay in effect until the new system kicks in. So there's still benefit to having done this. Development review, that's a big part of what we do. In addition to reviewing and issuing 77 zoning permits for homeowners and businesses, we supported the DRB through 8 site plan applications and design review applications, which are ultimately expected to enable the construction of up to 164 residential units, as well as add some downtown commercial space. The DRB will provide some more details on this in the next update to council in September.
Cool.
So, of course, there was the rental registry and inspection program proposal. That was a big project that we had taken on with the Planning Commission to create an initial proposal. I think we learned a lot from it, a lot about public engagement. We were, in the end, able to garner feedback from hundreds of owners, renters, and citizen activists. So whatever the outcome of the program, I think this conversation was probably worth the work. So This program is likely going to be pursued through the fire department, but the community development department is still available to assist with developing the program as necessary. Enforcement processes, we have implemented an electronic record keeping and tracking system for our zoning regulations and the enforcement of certain ordinances. The health officer records are now included in that as well, and the city council has access to the spreadsheet. The department also provided technical feedback to state legislators throughout the 2024 legislative sessions, reviewing draft bills that are relevant to housing and quality of life in the city. Another big thing that we started work on, and this actually continues, is the next round of land development code amendments. I mean, the land development code is always going to be evolving, but right now we're preparing for the Planning Commission a set of amendments to address some long-standing issues with the content neutrality of our sign regulations, which for the most part has not changed for a few decades, I think. This is to comply with the statutory requirements. There's also going to be some additional changes that are going to come out of the Connect the Junction Transit-Oriented Development Master Plan project. And there will be some work to figure out the timing of these land development code amendments, whether it makes sense to move forward first with kind of the simple kind of technical fixes, and when to bring in the pieces that are larger and have involved a bigger community conversation. Staffing the Bike Walk Advisory Committee. So to enable better coordination with our land use and transportation planning efforts, my department has assumed the role of staffing the Bike Walk Advisory Committee, which was previously staffed by EJRP. We worked on a few initiatives, including reviewing and uploading public bike lane and shared use path data onto Google Maps, purchasing and installing a self-service bike repair station in collaboration with the Brownell Library, and beginning an initiative to identify and fill gaps in public bike parking availability throughout the commercial areas of the city. Another thing we did is we filled a job opening with for the city planner position. Michael Jagger has been doing a fantastic job so far. He is now the staff contact for the Development Review Board and the Bike Walk Advisory Committee.
Great.
We also supported the Public Works Department and the Tree Advisory Committee this year in successfully applying for $18,000 in grant funding to address the emerald ash borer infestation in the city right-of-way trees. So in the 6-month look ahead, I mean, some of these things have been underway, but these are things I expect will be big initiatives going forward. Main Street Park. The work on this has resumed, and we're working on project delivery. That's for a project that will begin construction in 2025, and that's required by the grant anyway. So we do have a draft updated design now. Amtrak station renovation. We applied for and received pre-award authority from the Federal Railway Administration in May, which allows the city to begin preliminary design and engineering, environmental review, and work on other federal grant obligation requirements. So while it has taken longer than expected, we will be issuing an RFQ for design services soon on this. it's going to be a large project, and you know, with federal funding, I think there are a lot of complications. It just takes a few more iterations, especially with the land also being privately owned. Also, Connect the Junction Transit-Oriented Development Master Plan is an ongoing project that will reshape the land use policy along the Pearl Street and Park Street corridors. These are the main transit corridors of the city, especially Pearl Street with service every 20 minutes, which is the best, as good as it gets in Vermont. This will, with the help of a consulting team, we're going to be engaging the public on a new vision for housing, businesses, building height, density, streetscape improvements, and how all of those elements might evolve in the coming years. And also, a little bit related to that, the Pearl Street short-term multimodal improvements. There is a scoping study update. So some of you may recall there was previously a scoping study done on a road diet of reconfiguring the lanes between West Street's extension and Susie Wilson Road. There was a preferred alternative that came out of that, which would have reconfigured the road and added a shared use path on one side and had one through lane in each direction, and also removed the median and replaced the trees on the north side of the street. That is still a very much viable option for the long run, but it's beyond the budget that. I mean, we're unable to find state funding to fill such a large gap at the moment, and there are a lot of kind of short-term improvements that can be done along the corridor, and I think it's sorely needed. So this scoping study update is programmed for this coming year with CCRPC. We are awaiting a resolution on potential V-Trans project at the Susie Wilson Road and Route 15 intersection before starting this project. So, yeah, I mean, those are the big things we've got going on.
Couple things, just a few things. It's been a busy 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, I would say, you know, and I put on the memo that's we're excited for the upcoming year and to continue to focus on project delivery and to carry through some of these plans that we have been working on, and we'll likely have limited capacity to take on more at this point, but we certainly continue to we like the feedback for anything that you think we should focus on more or focus on less.
Well, thank you. I think everybody always has what they want for more, but I just want to also, you know, just appreciate the amount of work you've just presented that's co-occurring, and, you know, the daily work that you're all doing, but the number of projects and most of this is very deep and detailed and time consuming, with a lot of regulations. So I just want to appreciate the amount of work that's being done here, and I think it is and will have a lasting impact. So appreciate it, your group. I don't necessarily want to start, so did you have any?
Oh, no, I'm
Good? All right.
reiterate what Raj said. You're working on an awful lot, and all of it's important, so thank you very much. I'm really excited to see that the Amtrak renovation is going to get underway. That was a discussion when I first became a trustee, so it's great that we're taking things up again.
The Amtrak is big. That area, that corner, the reconstruction, the revitalization of it essentially will make a big impact. I'm also excited for the charrette that comes with the Connect the Junction transit-oriented master planning. I think that's great. Anytime we can, just spending 2-3 days out there talking to people with different workshops, that'll be great. Everybody always talks about how they want to have input, and here's the opportunity for input. So October 4th through 7th,
Charrettes are awful fun.
we'll see,
I really like charrettes.
And then you said there was a draft plan for the Main Street Park that had come through recently?
That's right. It has just been circulated around staff for initial round of review. I've sent it back to the consultant just for a little bit of refinement, but we will be also circulating that with council when I think with something that's going to technically work.
Okay, wonderful. And it really is. It's no shortage of a list of things that you have going on and that you have accomplished and that are continuing to go. And so I think as we look through this and then people start to see things happening, there's an impact there. And for me, really personally, the Amtrak is top of the list, and I'm really excited to see it and to be involved and invested in it, because I think that's a great thing. So thanks. That's all for me.
Going online, Marcus? Looks like you had your hand up first.
I think Amber beat me to the punch. You sure? Okay.
I don't think she ever minds.
I don't want to step on anybody's toes. Thank you. And again, I have to just echo what's already been said. So thank you so much for the work and effort that your department does for us. I do want to understand it a little bit better from the standpoint of staffing and thinking about what your department has and what your department needs as we look toward the future. And we had a conversation this last, you've already talked about it this last year concerning rental registry, but as part of that was trying to get to establishing a code enforcement position within the city as well and paying for that particular position. As you see it right now, can you talk about what we may be missing by not having the position? This is not a rental registry conversation. This is about just the position of not having an official code enforcement officer. And I also want to ask you in regards to enforcement, I happened to read recently some of the interactions that have happened that the health officer has been involved with recently. It looked like there had been a number of incidents relating to pets, and I'm kind of curious as to whether or not you feel we as a community or we as a city need to either have some education or what we might do if this is truly an increase in a problem with negative interactions with people's animals.
So the health officer's role is quite separate from what community development does. I think from my understanding, the call volume that's the health officer handles kind of ebbs and flows by time of the year, and there's some kind of randomness to it. I'm not sure I would be able to say that there is a sustained increase in call volumes for the health officer at the moment, but also that is a good question for the health officer himself. In terms of other enforcement items and what we're missing out on by not having the half FTE focused on enforcement, I think it comes down to relying more on a complaints-based system that is for many things that's not not a huge problem, but there are also some. I think there's arguably some equity concern when you're focusing your attention on properties just based on based on who's complaining and who's complaining about what. I think it's easier to get into a situation where the enforcement could be more regressive, where people suffering, people who have fewer resources are getting picked on a little more. But also, the solution might not be to just pick on everybody. The solution sometimes comes down to updating the overarching goals that we're trying to enforce. And I would say that we are working towards that with the staff that we do have, just in terms of updating the land development code, for example, the sign regulations. Yes, that's taking some time, but also I do believe the product that comes out of that will be more enforceable and more understandable and easier to communicate. But in terms of proactive campaigns on priority enforcement items, we are able to still do some of that with the staff that we have. We just have to really pick and choose what has the most impact.
From that, if I may ask, then, and again, one of the things that I will point out as something I really appreciated was seeing you and your department out for National Night Out, talking about the project. And sorry, all of a sudden I went blank, but
Connected Junction.
Thank you, the Connected Junction project. But to that end, because of the fact that you have already identified through what you've written and through previous conversations, it sounds like there's still a fair amount of LDC work ahead of you, ahead of us. I know the Planning Commission is obviously involved in this and supporting you there, but I mean, do we have the manpower to do this in a timely enough fashion to make the impacts that we need to in the short term, let alone the long term?
I do think it is challenging to work with the staff size that we have, department size that we have. It is already a lot better than before having now having 3 people in the department. We used to have 2, but also when the village was in the town, there were also some shared resources. I do think there is some. There are some challenges to Vermont having such small municipalities in that some work is repeated. Every municipality wants to be, wants to have a to make their own rules and to engage their own population and to really customize the regulations, and that does take time. Like, for example, the sign regulations, we're kind of working from what Burlington already has and trying to customize that to fit our needs, but it is still a whole conversation that we're having as one small municipality here, and yeah, it does take time and it's difficult. But in terms of, do we have enough staff? I think, I wouldn't say we have enough staff to do everything we want to do, but if we prioritize what matters the most and take the appropriate shortcuts when it's available, I think we can achieve a lot with the people that we do have.
Thank you.
Amber.
Chris, I'm wondering if you know whether there is an increase in the number of.
Well, you froze.
Oh.
Yeah, let me know.
Let me let her know.
Shoot. Lost her.
Amber, you froze after increase in the number of.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, weird, because I wasn't frozen on my side. So, anywho.
Good to hear.
So I was wondering, Chris, if you could speak to whether there's an increase in the number of permits that are being pulled, or if it seems like we're consistent over year, or we're less permits, or just generally, how you think things are going in that department?
I have not noticed a big change in the number of permits. I mean, that is something that's at the end of the year we can tally up, and we do tally up. But it seems to be pretty consistent so far. I do think that the types of permits that are being pulled can make quite a big difference. There are permits for one residential unit, and there are permits for 50. Every year we do tally up both number of permits that we issue and the number of housing units that are added or removed, and that's something I think to watch the trend of.
Great, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Chris, I just want to circle back, and this is something dear to my heart, but I appreciate your keeping the Pearl Street corridor process going one way or the other. I know it's been difficult trying to figure out what that would be. And I know the rental registry program took an awful lot of time for you and the Planning Commission to do, and I just want to say I appreciated that. I don't think it was for naught. I think we're going to get there one way or the other and keep that discussion going. So I just wanted to appreciate the time and effort that went into that, because I think it was more than, this conversation's been ongoing for quite some time. Work's been ongoing for quite some time. It didn't just appear when we came to a public meeting on it. So just wanted to say that as well. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work, Chris. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Yep, appreciate it. All right. Actually, Chris, before you go, because you know me, there's no one in the room, but if there's anyone online that has a comment or question for the council on this topic tonight, please do raise your hand. And we'll give it a couple moments to see if anyone does. And it doesn't look like anyone is going to, so this time, Chris, really thank you. All right, 5C, discussion regarding city committees.
So we've been wanting to have a bit of a general conversation for a few reasons about committees. So you've got this memo in your packet. Don't need to go into it in too much detail, but we have talked about a few things. One being the nimbleness when we're doing the recruitment each spring, and thinking about right-sizing the committees based on that. Sometimes we don't have enough interest. Sometimes we have more interest than the number of seats. We have thus far adjusted when it made sense, and I think we'll be okay with that method going forward. We do have a budget for the stipends for these committees, so that will, be adjusted slightly, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's fairly minor. The other reason why we've talked about this is a little bit also tied to number 4 on this list, which is the thinking on other committee work that might come into play for the city. And when we think about that, it will probably make a good sense to kind of think holistically about the current committees that we have in place, and if there is any adjustment when we're looking at those. So because we've got Rec Advisory Council on tonight, and we will shortly have the Governance Committee that we'll start talking about, I just wanted to go through that exercise for those two. So Rec Advisory, the Bike Walk Committee is certainly dealing and working on recreation type facilities for walking and biking. I think they are pretty tied into a lot of the transportation infrastructure in terms of moving people from A to B, kind of biking and walking, and the safety of that. So I think particularly with what the Community Development Department is focused on right now, it sort of makes sense that those, we kind of keep that separate from what we're thinking for the Rec Advisory Council. Then also for the Governance Committee, that is really very particular, has a very particular purpose as defined in the charter, and also we don't envision that to be a long-standing committee. It should be set up to fulfill its mission and not be long-standing. So don't see any adjustments associated with that committee. We've also talked about how to improve the collaboration between these committees that we've got out and the council and your work and your priorities. So I think that will come into play in a few ways. One is just starting up this strategic planning work aligned with the department work plans that they're working on. Once we bring those together, we'll be able to sort of begin to get an assessment of how big of an effort we're talking about, what we can take on, what we can't. And we will also set up a process where the committees can actually feed into that system as well. Don't have that well defined yet and how that will look, but I do think eventually we will get there. We also do have the committees kind of on a regularly scheduled basis coming to the council meetings to have a conversation, much like Chris, as a department head, just came in and had a conversation about what's going on for him. We've got the committees scheduled to come in and do that as well.
That's great.
Good.
I'm just going to ask you to hold on for a second because
Yeah.
I think we lost Amber.
Oh, yes.
Oh, we did.
So I'm just going to check in with her.
Did you text her? You want me
I
to?
did, yeah. Just noticed she wasn't up there.
Oh, in the waiting room.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Number 4, potential new committees. So since we were having this conversation, I thought it might be a good idea to just start thinking about the number of committees on this project list. So as a reminder, when we brought forward the strategic action plan in July, the project list was also introduced to you folks for the first time. And again, Ashley did a great job caveating that 1,000 times over, that is just a list that we've been working on and pulling together since I've been here through various ideas. It's the thought on fiscal year and the thought on who could lead these things and if they have capacity is absent the effort of the work plans from the departments so far, and so really work in progress. So really just ideas, but I thought it might make sense to give you folks an idea, a little bit of time to give some direction on how this list is prioritized thus far on the new committees. As a reminder, this list has identified the top 3 strategic plan pillars, and those committees that have an asterisk are in that category of the top 3, and same thing for the actions in that last column. So I don't need to go into detail on this list. You folks have seen it. Unless you'd like me to walk down through it, happy to do that. Or I'll just take thoughts if folks have it.
Well, I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, this is one of those conversations that I think is going to continue for sure.
Yep,
It's right
and-
back to our constant conversation around capacity and wanting to do so many things.
Yeah, and excellent point. So thanks for that. I'll caveat again. Definitely not the last time. Definitely not asking for final decisions tonight. Just would be helpful to get a little bit of direction on
Yeah, and I mean, going to the, it'd be great to be able to do everything at once. I think my thinking on this topic has always been, or has evolved too, after 5.5 years of doing this. I think there are some that make sense to have structurally. As the work plans develop, as this whole process you've described that we're in the middle of right now develops, I do wonder if some of these committees are more subcommittees of current board, like, is Bike Walk more of a subcommittee of the Planning Commission made up of some couple volunteers from the community, 1 or 2 Planning Commission members, a counselor? Like, how can we, if we want to do more things, how can we rethink some of the structure of these to deal with finite applications from volunteers in the community? Also, I think you can also maybe make them more efficient or more effective potentially. If I'm not saying I have any one idea in mind, but the other thing I'll say is the DEI component here. I see that, the thinking behind the explanation for removing that right now makes sense. It's also worrisome for me. I don't know, like I said, I understand it. I trust staff will keep that focus, and maybe we revisit that if we don't think we're getting anywhere. But back to that re-envisioning, right below that is downtown or economic development. I would love to have opportunities to really brainstorm with community members and us and other staff to really think about, how other communities have done, set some of these up, not just that one, but others. Like, I think that's a blind spot that some of us, like I have sometimes, like, well, let's do this. And we don't take the time to see what the thousands of other communities have potentially done that have been successful. And I think we've heard a lot recently with the CV conversation around economic development, and very little of that has been centered around quality of life, wellness, happiness, feeling. It's great to have economic development, but where, will that include areas that don't necessarily bring in tangible economic gain, like space for art, space for creators, things like that. So I hope that as we think about some of these, there's opportunities to really get creative and really think through what the mission and purpose of some of them will be. And maybe some of them are a little non-traditional and cross some topic areas, especially if we're finding we're limited in volunteers and we're limited in time. That's really not specific. I understand that.
Fine, helpful.
The other thing is, Housing Commission is a real disappointment that we can't attract, and I think that goes to a little bit of what Chris was talking about. I guess my last point is, are there opportunities to look at the communities we border with, and maybe some that we don't, and say, we have common interests. Do we just work together on these things because they're similar enough? Do we need our own housing? We were working with the town. We separated from that. Are we really that different? Are we really that different from Winooski or Williston on some of this? Are there opportunities where we can bring in more, increase the pool to pick from? That brings challenges, right? But I don't know that they're challenges that we can't overcome. So just larger ideas, but not.
So, as a regional-based kind of thing rather than
Yeah.
independent municipal. Yeah. I think that's a Vermont thing. Is as Chris was saying, it's individual municipalities. If you go outside of Vermont, they're regional.
Yeah,
And
a lot
then
of
you
county
get a
work.
big, yeah, and then you get a bigger, because you're right. I mean, all our roads are connected. We may not have the same identity, but we're within distance of each other. So.
I mean, do we, with the DEI one, do we dive into what CCRPC or VLCT is doing and not have our own, but we're heavily participating with anyway, I'll stop. Elaine, do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
I do. Thank you for pulling all this together into one place to have it all. That's really helpful. I understand the thinking behind the comments on the DEI committee, but I am not willing to remove that committee from the list unless this board has a strong commitment to overseeing and implementing our own DEI processes and making sure that the staff is being held accountable for doing it on the staff level. And by that I mean, I know multiple times I have shared the example of what the city of Winooski is doing. They have a board, a city council down process, and the city council reviews every policy that comes before them with a DEI lens. They are very, very particular and intentional about new policies that they develop and going back and looking at old policies. So rather than entrusting this to staff to let us know if they think it's working or not, I think it's this council's responsibility to set the tone and to set the example of doing that work at our level and ensuring that everyone else is doing it. So I don't know if that means perhaps putting the Winooski documentation in the reading file and like letting us get used to it and talk about it as a topic about how we would implement something similar. And my context for this is that I'm on the VLCT's Equity Advisory Committee, and we are working on municipal toolkits exactly for this kind of conversation. And so the Winooski example is one that we've been using. Also, the University of Virginia and the city of Austin, Texas, all three have really excellent models, depending upon what kind of city or town you are and where you are in the readiness scale of ability to get involved in this kind of thing. I think we are definitely ready. I think it's time for us to actually implement something. So I really would, if we're going to remove this committee idea, then we need to take it on ourselves and set the tone. So I feel very strongly about that. The other question I have is under the Downtown or Economic Development Committee, it says, unless a volunteer effort wants to start sooner. And you know, Raj, you had said like looking to other towns and looking at other opportunities and trying to understand what it means for economic development in like the big scheme of things. And there's actually been quite a bit of activity on the grassroots level here in the city about what we want. There's been multiple meetings prior to the strategic planning process, and then the strategic planning process incorporated the findings of those prior meetings. So there's definitely lots of documentation of what economic development might mean for the city of Essex Junction. And then we also had two public webinars with some economic development experts to explore what other towns in Vermont are doing. So I think we actually do have a strong foundation of what's possible. And so I would like to understand what the phrase, unless a volunteer effort wants to start sooner, means, because there is one, and they're really ready to get started. And I would hate to have that dissipate. And so I'd love to have some better clarity as to understanding the capacity issues with staff. A volunteer committee would need some kind of interface with staff. What would that look like? Could we have a discussion about it? There are folks out in our community that really, really, really want to do this work. And it's not just the business strength, that aspect of it, but also public art, events, communications. There is so much that folks want to get done. And so I really want to make sure we harness that energy, don't let it dissipate. And if we can have a volunteer committee, let's do it. But understand what that actually means. You know, if it just means, 2 hours a month for someone to take minutes, and maybe we could afford that. But if we have something bigger, I don't want to go out there and say, hey, it looks like a volunteer group can take off on this, and then suddenly it gets bigger and we're stuck with this, huge amount of energy and commitments and things that want to get done and no staff capacity for it. So.
Yeah, I'll just say broadly, but two things broadly. One, I think we need to see how this all comes together and what actual resources there are at the staff level. But two, when I say volunteer, I'm basically mean there isn't staff. There isn't staff capacity. So I think that's, again, we can kind of sort of figure this out.
I mean, an example I have is when the farmers market started. that was entirely a volunteer effort that was not affiliated with the village initially. And in spite of that, the farmers market still needed assistance. Like, we still needed to block the road, so we needed to talk to Public Works. We still needed some signs. So, and then eventually they came to the village and asked for funding, and it became a very collaborative effort because it was so hugely successful. And, I'm hoping that if a volunteer effort is allowed to take off, that their successes would be met with as much help as could be provided it was reasonable, and that should it take off, that it does become more of a priority. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that worries me about it being too volunteer and too bare bones, right, is a lot of these may require, if we're going for state funding and state programs and we're doing all this other stuff, that is, I'm assuming, no small pull from community development. That when they're successful in a project or getting something done or moving something forward, there will be staff time needed. I mean, you can't file the support from the city on your own as a volunteer group. So, I think we heard loud and clear from that, just referencing the strategic planning process we all went through, that people really want to say and how the community as a whole in the downtown are going to look and how they're going to feel. And so I just basically put this back out to the community. Having heard tonight how busy the community development department is with regular day-to-day work, if this is a priority, what are we willing to do to ensure that at this point in time, which feels like a decision point for us, how interested are we in having a say in it? And I bring that up as a budget question. Is it important enough for a half an FTE to make sure that at this point, with finite open space and finite number of projects coming online, that we really want to say in it and we really want to know what it's going to look like and what does that require? I mean, just being blunt, because that may be what it is.
Yeah.
A finite half FTE. I'm not saying I'm proposing anything. I'm not saying that is what it would be, but there are options for the community to consider.
Yeah.
If we say we need someone for 2 or 3 years at a half FTE to get this X, Y, and Z done, that the volunteer committees come up with, here's our 5 goals for the next 3 years.
Right.
So maybe there's a mix there. Maybe it's the volunteer, organization, the volunteer group sets those and then comes back to the council, and then we can take it to step 2, which is, okay, we seem to agree on this.
Yeah.
What's it going to take to implement it? It's going to take a lot of hours.
I think based on, it's just this one phrase, unless a volunteer effort wants to start sooner. I think there is one. And I think allowing it to start and develop into what you're talking about, Raj, is a logical step. I think that there are many ideas and things that could be done and discussions to be had at the volunteer level before they even get.
Yeah.
So, that's why I'm hoping that I just see this as a door. And I know that there's folks out there that want to get this effort started, and it could be as simple as, hey, there's people out there who want to get this started, and we just sit back and watch it happen, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fantastic. And I want to make sure that that group is being as inclusive and intentional with outreach for engaging volunteers we don't normally see, not the same 8 people or 6 people. Because right now it feels like the same wonderful, amazing 6 or 8 people. And if it were a city committee, we would be working very hard to make sure that the folks doing that work we beat the bushes to try to get those voices. So if this is going to be a group that is going to set priorities like that, then we're not going to have the wherewithal as a committee or a city to sort of pick who's on it. So I just want to make sure that that group does that work and is formed in a way that is as inclusive and wide-reaching as possible.
Yeah, that's, I definitely understand that. I think there's also a level of trust that the council has to give to the residents.
Trust is nice, but,
Yeah.
you know, we're not talking about what we just talked about in the DEI sphere based on trust either. So there's trust, and there's, you know, ensuring that these volunteer efforts on their own, when their intention is to come back to the city and then ask for resources, have done it in a way that we can embrace. And it's not like that hasn't been happening. I just want to make sure that as we think about like tasking separate entities to do stuff like this, that we're, you know, it just goes back to the rubric you were talking about from Winooski. You know, if it were our project, we would go through these things based on that, right? And so if we would have that expectation of any volunteer group that they're sort of carrying that thinking and those processes through. So, I mean, if they're, you know, I guess Regina too, on that, you know, we've had very frank conversations about what we expect from the next budget. And I don't think anybody wants to go back on any of that. But it might also be interesting, you know, after this conversation or one more conversation, to find out what some of this might mean if you know, I don't know, it's too early for that. Yeah, it's too early for that.
Marcus has his hand
Yeah,
up too.
sorry, Marcus. Sometimes the glare from the chandelier in here.
It's all
Can't
good,
see.
I know. I've sat there before. So I just want to say that I agree with what Elaine just said, and I totally understand your concern, Raj. So I'll start here by saying that when we're talking about any of the committees, I really have a hard time pushing off a committee for based on the consideration. I understand the pressures. What I'm trying to just acknowledge the fact is, through the strategic process, we also identified these pillars. These being pillars, I have a hard time delaying that beginning for a committee like this one specifically for another 2 fiscal years, based on the fact that, again, it is a pillar that we want to tackle. And through that strategic process, often the way that it was spoken about was this was our 5-year kind of strategic plan, right? Even though I think in some discussions it was 5 to 10. But I think in that mindset, I would rather do something, but I will agree with you that I think there's a way to do this if, again, all things remain equal in regards to staffing. I think there's probably a way to leverage a volunteer effort to help get some things started and do some things. We don't have to task them to look at certain things or to go in a particular way. If they're a volunteer effort, hopefully, you know, they get to a point and they want to bring something forth for us to think about, like, you know, the farmer's market's a good example, right? It's not really a big I don't think it's a big heavy lift for us, while there will be departments that have to be engaged for signage, road closures, things like that. We already have processes and policies in place to kind of manage those kinds of things. So I think there's ways to do this without doing the full-fledged committee, but I would prefer to see us put focus and effort around these pillars sooner rather than later, because again, we've committed, the community participated in the strategic plan and it asked us to put focus on this. So I would like to be able to do that. And so I want to acknowledge, Roger, what you said as well, which is you're absolutely right. I think we need to have an honest conversation around what staff abilities or staff capacity is, in order to then talk about what may need to be the discussion in the upcoming budget, so that we can address some of these things. I do also want to say and go back to the DEI committee and say that I think things like this committee, for instance, if there was a way to, as Tim mentioned, regionalize this. I think there are ways for us to address it without having to necessarily create a formal committee. But I agree with Elaine's assertion that, look, if we are committed to this and we are creating that starting point for the rest, hopefully this will flow through the work and into the committees. One of the things I also wanted to mention, Housing Commission. So I've heard this assertion that we've had trouble to fill a Housing Commission. In having spoken to Essex Junction residents that were part of that previous commission, it sounds like to me there has been some confusion around city priority and city desire to have said commission. So I think there are people that are part of that commission that would participate currently if we wanted to stand it up. But at the same time, in looking at this and thinking about how this might play out, and again, balancing out committee priorities, and I'm not trying to take back what I just said either, this feels like this is a subgroup or work group within Planning Commission. And so I wonder if in a work group structure, if you need, like, what does that staff resource need to feel or look like? Because in a work group, I don't see them participating necessarily in those meetings. Maybe they're a resource for a work group like that to go to get some insights or research. I don't know how much that would look like. Again, this is a strong pillar for this community for the coming out of the strategic plan. So I just don't want to blanketly ignore it. We're going to talk later on about I'll worry about rec later. Policy ordinance feels like it's a work group. It's a small group of people. Again, hopefully it's because coming out of it, I think the initial thing when I feel and I look at our policies or ordinances, I still see dated documentation. From the fact that we haven't formally gone through every document, policy, and ordinance we have and updated them to city, for instance. So I don't know whether or not this kind of committee is necessary, because I think that if we're talking about just a committee that will take a look at that and update, that might be just a small work group, so you don't need a full-on committee for that. I feel like while community engagement is very important, again, another pillar, don't know if we need to stand up right now a committee around Ashley and her department in order to support her efforts or not. I'd love to get more feedback as to how she believes this may or may not support her. I think that on the surface, I think it feels like to me that Ashley has got this handled, and that we're advancing, moving forward and making improvements. And so I don't know how that looks in respect to her work and her efforts. And then, the City Energy Committee, I'll just mention real quick too. I think this is another part of, I think this could be just a work group. This doesn't need to be there as a formal committee. It's just a work group of the Planning Commission. That's the way it feels to me. But I'll leave it there for now, but I think hopefully I didn't ramble too much and didn't lose you along the way. Sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. And you reminded me that when I was putting this together, I was hesitating even doing this because we're looking at just one question of committees, and it's absent sort of the larger view that it's not to say that we aren't doing a lot of the work that kind of falls in the categories of these. So having this discussion in isolation of you sort of seeing what all that other stuff is a little bit tricky. So I think you made some great points, Marcus, that we are doing some of this work. We will be able to be responsive to that strategic plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not addressing those pillars if we don't stand up one of these committees. So, yeah.
Good point. Amber, anything? No? Tim?
No, I'm good. My only thought would be with the downtown economic development, if the volunteers want to come forward and they start working on that, and then they have an ask of staff and there isn't capacity and they hit a dead stop. And I don't want to lose that volunteer effort. And so we just have to be mindful of that. I'm all for people, wanting to come forward and volunteer. I think they just have to be mindful that if it's something we're talking about in greater capacity, that they may not get an answer immediately, and that there needs to be a revolving conversation around that. And that's my only apprehension to that, is I just don't want to have them get the ball rolling and in full steam ahead and then hit a hard stop. And so, other than that, I think Marcus covered quite a bit of what it is, and I think a lot of it could be work groups and subcommittees. And but there's a conversation first second or third, but another conversation around all of this, and so I look forward to coming back to it again at some point. But
It's also probably not a way, Regina, to pass along stipends to volunteers that aren't on a official committee, which is disappointing, because it was pointed out at the beginning of the meeting in public to be heard, but this is a big ask of people. They're putting a lot of time in it, considering the economic development one, or any of these. It's just a lot of time and effort people are putting in.
You're absolutely right, but I would also point out that most downtown committees and organizations of that kind are entirely volunteer.
Yeah.
It's the way it's done.
No, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's just thinking it through. We can't probably do that, so.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right. Brad Luck, presentation and discussion of overview of Essex Junction Recreation and Parks. Thanks for waiting.
No problem.
Come right up there. Yeah, that's fine.
Want me to start?
Sure. Go ahead. Regina, do you have an intro or?
I'll just, go ahead.
Yeah, I could just start. So
Sure.
we've had a couple of different questions around sort of how EGRP kind of works, how it's structured. So we thought it'd be a good idea to have this conversation so you can get a little bit more insight into that. That's the purpose of this, and thanks, Brad, for putting this together.
Sure. I'll just run through the highlights. You obviously can
Sure.
read through this, so I won't.
Yep.
I won't go through word for word.
Great.
Just a very basic overview that EGRP has been around since 1970, and we don't have all the facts in front of us. But in 1970, it was a municipal recreation department. In 1971, it became part of the Essex Junction School District, and that's where our department resided until 2018. When the Essex Westward School District was formed and the Essex Junction School District was dissolved, we returned basically to the municipality, the village at the time, and obviously now city. So we've been around a while, but we are the new kid on the block in terms of being a municipal department. Just some quick data from this past summer. These are duplicated numbers, and when I say that, that means if a kid, a child or an adult participated in a program or multiple, like in a swim lesson twice, they would have been counted twice. So it's not 542 unique individuals in swim lessons, but that's the number of participants that enrolled in swim lessons this past summer. Obviously, a lot of people, and 186 staff were on our most recent payroll. So it takes a significant effort to serve all those people, and we thoroughly enjoy it. And as I had mentioned, I think at some point when I was here recently, feel very fortunate to have gotten those staffing numbers back to par. You know, we, like everyone, experienced the challenges of finding part-time and full-time people. And in both camps, we are in far, far better shape these days, which is a relief. So we have two major funds. One is the general fund, and this fund is paid for through the tax levy and by taxpayers. There's two categories within the general fund. There's administration and parks and facilities. Within the administration, we have 6 full-time employees, and as you may recall, in FY25, we added services for older adults to the city. That was previously provided by the town. And so that program director for older adults is within the general fund of the administration budget. And we also added $20,000 in supplies and contractor related expenses to support older adult programming. And again, I think that that's been part of both the previous trustees and the city council's purview or desires to continue to support that programming, and acknowledging that providing them with a base level of funding rather than making everything pay to play was an approach that I think you all were interested in supporting, and that's why that money is there. Otherwise, in administration, there's very little other money in our general fund. 92% of the administrative general fund goes to salaries and benefits. There's not really a whole lot to move. So when we get to budget time, you'll see the salary and benefits numbers I don't have any control over. The other 8% we do, but very little. So there's really not much left being funded in the general fund to support Parks and Recreation other than those 8 personnel those 6 personnel in administration.
Brad, can I interrupt you for one quick second?
Uh-huh.
I just see that Marcus's hand is up, and I just want to make sure he's hearing us and he's not trying to alert us of something.
No. I just had a quick question. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. I just would like, if you don't mind, to define contractor when you listed here under the older adults.
Sure. That's like when we would hire a fitness instructor for a program or hire a music act for a luncheon. So those are the kinds of contractors we're working with when it comes to programs for the most part.
Great, thanks.
So in Parks and Facilities, and Parks and Facilities does include the buildings role, and that's something that we're still working through and figuring out what that looks like for the city and what the best approach is moving forward. But for now, the buildings within the city are supported through the EGRP Parks and Facilities Department, most predominantly through the Parks and Facilities Director, but obviously that has an impact on all of those who work for him, which either requires that they do additional work at the park when he is not available to do the work that he was previously scheduled to do, or that they're leaving Parks and Facilities projects to go and work on buildings projects for the greater city. Otherwise, there is money in the general fund for contractors, supplies, repairs and maintenance, and gasoline to support our parks and facilities. We consider Park Street School as basically an EGRP building. It's a city-owned building, but we are now the sole users of it for the last 4 years. The Essex Westford School District Alternative High School Education Program, ACE, was in the top floor, and since they've moved just this past June, and now we occupy the entire space. And then obviously with buildings, Maple Street Park. We do have a capital budget, and we've continued, we'll talk about that later, but it continues to be 1% of the grand list. So overall, the tax levy to support Parks and Recreation is $1.4 million, and that's about 12.5% of the total tax levy for the general fund for the city.
Okay.
I'm going to move to the program fund. This is an enterprise fund. That's how it's referred to in all other ventures that you all deal with, but we call it the program fund because that's where we operate our programs out of. So this fund is entirely paid for by user fees. There are no There are no tax dollars that go into this fund. There are multiple categories within the program fund, but in general, it includes administration, the Maple Street Pool, parks and facilities for some things, all recreation programs, which includes community events, after-school childcare, preschool, summer day camps. The total is 3.8 million, and there are 20 full-time staff that are supported through the program fund. You can see there's some highlights of the types of expenses that come through here, all of the programs that are supported through here, all of the community events that are supported through here. There are a couple of examples just of how some of that program fund money is used. And so basically what happens is, because it's an enterprise fund, all of those funds stay there to support recreation. And so we're able to use those funds. Just in this past year, we made some very significant renovations to Park Street School, playground upgrades and an expansion to include a new classroom and new slots for 2- and 3-year-olds. That was all done out of the program fund. So we didn't have to bother the capital fund. We didn't have to ask for more general fund money. We were able to utilize surplus from the program fund and then make that investment. Similarly, this year, I had been here previously. We just this May installed people counters at Maple Street Park. Those were paid for completely out of the program fund. So again, we didn't have to put those in our capital queue. We didn't have to put those in a general fund or a request. We're able to make those kinds of improvements. There's new benches and trash receptacles that are needed at the front of Maple Street Park that are on order. And we made some really significant improvements to the pool house, in particular the guard room this past year. By utilizing a program fund, the users of the programs really bear the brunt of the costs, and non-users don't have to contribute involuntarily through the tax levy. Surplus revenues are reinvested in recreation-related programs, community events, staffing to support community events, supplies, equipment, and infrastructure. And it really presents the opportunities for our department to be entrepreneurial, nimble, and flexible in the creation and implementation of recreation services. As I talk about a little bit here, right now, the budget timeline, the first draft is due 10 months before the budget season starts, and the expectation is that will go through 22 months out. And so for us to sit here in September and tell you what programs we're going to be offering 22 months away is really challenging. We do that because we have to develop a program fund budget, but oftentimes we will need to add or subtract programs based on the wants and needs of folks and things that are emerging, whether that means there's a new contractor in town, there's a new program that's popular. All of those things factor into what we're offering. By doing that through a program fund, we have that flexibility. If that was all general fund money, we would really struggle to have that flexibility to offer those new programs or cut certain programs if they weren't working. A lot of these things, I talk about in this final piece is the marketplace that we're in. All recreation departments are serving their residents, but they're also being a part of the marketplace. And so the advantage to that I think our city residents have with EGRP is that our programming opportunities are local, and that so if you want to access an adult basketball league, you can do that here, and you don't have to drive to St. Albans. Many guys and women drive from St. Albans or Fairfax to here because that's how they access those types of opportunities. And we have to be regional in order to be successful and offer certain programs. We just don't have the capacity, even with 11,000 people or 22,000 people, to create a men's basketball league with 64 players. We have to pull regionally. And so again, the advantage of EGRP doing that and being the resource is that people can do that in their own backyard. We can offer more programs, and people have, again, an avenue, a direct avenue for feedback, for voicing concerns by going through their local municipality and not through a private provider or another municipality. So we think we're providing some great quality of life services for our residents, and doing that off the tax levy as much as possible, and doing that locally, and therefore that's how we're able to generate so many more programs, I think, than some other departments. The last fund I'll talk about is our capital fund. It's been around since 2002, and for the first 15 years, it was voted on as a separate line item by taxpayers, either at the school annual meeting, and then that switched to Australian ballot. So it has a history of direct support from taxpayers. And so you can see it started out at 60,000 and went to a penny. It did fail at one point, and they kept it at $75,000 level for a few years, and then it returned back to the penny where it's been since FY15. The numbers are on the next page, and I won't necessarily walk through them, other than to say, if you look at the total budget, 73% of our entire spending is within the program fund, and 27% is in the general fund. And industry average is the inverse of that. If you're to look at NRPA standards and things, that's usually the opposite. That is all the information I had, and happy to answer questions or have discussion.
Thanks, Brad. That was great. Anybody? Marcus?
Yeah, it's me. Brad, if you don't mind, if you could just deep dive a little bit in, as you talked about earlier, being nimble and flexible in bringing programs to the community. Can you talk a bit about some of the thinking or some of the strategy that goes into coming up with programs? Because, just an example, and this is not to pick on any piece of this, but just an example, like when I think of Parks and Rec, I don't think of driver's ed, but that is a program that we're offering and is being utilized by our community, and I really appreciate that. But I'm curious about how that thinking goes to bring in these programs.
I think there's a variety of factors. It's identifying wants and needs of the community. It's hearing feedback from folks. It's individual residents reaching out to us and asking us about programs that we can offer. It's local vendors or contractors reaching out to us and seeing if a partnership is mutually beneficial. So I appreciate your bringing up driver's ed. I think that that is not, I would say, not a traditional thing you're going to find in most recreation departments. Talk to anybody who has a 15, 16, or 17-year-old, and it's a serious need and it's a serious want. The schools have limited capacities to service all of the kids who would like to get their driver's license. And many times it can be not until you're a senior that you actually would get in the school-based program. And many kids and families have a desire for those kids to get their license much younger. So we're servicing an important need for those folks to get access so that those kids can get licenses. That'd be a great example of where we're providing non-traditional programs to meet community needs.
Thank you for that. And my second question, in regard to talking about being accessible regionally. When you talk about the basketball league needing 64 people to put this league together, for instance, let's just say 65 sign up for this particular league. Is there a prioritization for residents, or what is the process or policy so that for accessibility into these programs?
Yeah, good question. So right now, just in the basketball example at 65, there is not a prioritization of residents. When that brochure comes out, registration is open and available. It's open to residents and non-residents to sign up. There was a period of time, if we go back, I don't know how many years, Marcus, where we always had this staggered registration period of 2 weeks of resident-only registration, and then it moves into non-resident registration. What we've found with the vast majority of programs is that's really not necessary, and that most programs don't fill immediately or overnight, and there are opportunities for residents to enroll. And the basketball league is a good example. That league used to be at 48 guys per per season. And over time, again, what we do is watch the needs and wants of the community. If there are lots of people on the wait list, then we add more teams as we can, or we reduce the number of players on each team in order to get more players in, and add more teams. So those are the kinds of things that we've done over time, over and over again, right? I mean, preschool used to be a one classroom preschool with 3 to 5 year olds. It turned into 2 classrooms with a 3-4 and a 4-5 room. It's now 3 classrooms with a 2-3. So after school program, you know, we used to just be in the schools. We were hitting capacity, having too many kids at some of our schools. Now we bring the kindergartners, both from the city and the town, over to Maple Street Park every day in order to free up space at the schools so that we can better service them and service more kids. So, you know, we're just constantly reading and reacting and trying to make it better for people, include more people, all of those things, make it more efficient.
Last thing is just a comment. It's not even a question. I was at the dog park after the last dog event at the pool. Lots of great comments from people who had just come from that event, came over to the dog park for a little more outdoor time with their animal. And it was great feedback to hear. They had a great time. And then lastly, thank you for this summary within the packet. This is great. This is a great look at EGRP holistically, and with some of these breakdowns, makes, I think, our job a lot easier to be able to talk about the programs that are being offered and the things that we're trying to do through the Parks and Rec in order to support this community. So thank you for this.
Great, thanks.
Good night.
Sure.
You touched on it briefly, the buildings, I'll call it facilities management, that is through your department. That I find a little atypical that it's in Parks and Rec, but like the temporary space that had to be set up as we get ready to renovate to Lincoln pulled your employees over here, and that work was being done over here. And so that doesn't leave them there at your facilities to do any of the necessary things. How was the management of all of that? How has that affected your operations? Have you been able to reprioritize what needs to happen? Or things still getting done in a, you know, how is the balance of resources between what you need to accomplish for rec and what the city needs to accomplish for buildings?
It's a really good question. I think it's an ongoing question, and myself, Harlan, Regina, and Jess meet every 2 months to discuss this building's role and how it's working and how can it work better and what are we going to need to do in the next budget cycle in order to support that. And those are all the conversations we're having and it's really hard because we just don't know what the norm is going to be. You know, right now there's a major renovation happening in this building. It required exactly what you're saying, evacuating everybody there, building a brand new thing here. And it's involved lots of other work. At some point that will all go away, but we know there's a laundry list of other buildings related needs within the city. And so we just don't know how that's going to affect. But to answer your question, yes, those employees needed to get pulled over here. Most of the time it ended up in some people that were working, you know, maybe anticipated working 20 or 25 or 30 hours a week, working more like 30 or 35 or 40 hours a week when maybe they didn't want to, but that's what the job demanded.
But there was no negative impact on your day-to-day operations of the rec department at Maple Street or any of your other facilities. I know you moved the seniors out and then stood the senior program up at Holy Family. And that was no small task.
Yep.
And then, you know, with everybody that's come over here to move all of the filing cabinets and the cubicles and all of that stuff, there was no neglect that you found to any of your other operations or negative impact?
I don't think neglect. I mean, the lawns got mowed, the fields got lined, the pool was taken care of. You know, things are safe and looking good. I think it did put a strain on staff and caused them to put in more time or split their time more than they probably wanted to or would normally need to.
Okay. I was curious about that because, like I said, buildings isn't something that normally you find under Parks and Recreation. Much like driver's ed. However, I will say, as someone whose son was lucky enough to get into driver's ed at the school as a sophomore, there is an incredible need for driver's ed in this community. So that program, abnormal for Parks and Rec, sure. Needed for this community, absolutely. And I think it's great that EJRP offers it.
I guess having you here, this is another opportunity to ask, you know, what challenges are you looking forward to? Do you foresee? I know you love a challenge, Brad.
I do.
Do you foresee short and long term? I know we've talked about a facility study,
Yeah.
and some other things, but and this may be able to transition into the next conversation a little bit, but like, yeah. So what's your outlook? What needs do you see? What should we be aware of? The community be aware of?
Yeah, our number one is facilities right now. The school is taking some pretty drastic drastic actions, which is resulting in a far reduced accessibility and far increased costs. And both, you know, if there's not enough hours to offer all of the basketball opportunities that we have in the past within the schools, we're totally stuck. We have no basketball facilities. And that goes on and on for other things too.
Mm-hmm.
But facilities is our number one. Indoor gym space would be our primary, and with a walking track above. And then otherwise it's really about field space. If you ever come over to Maple Street Park, on most given nights, it's packed and there's a lot going on, and it's great and it's fantastic, and we want to continue it. There's strains and challenges with parking at Maple Street Park with the number of things that we have going on, and strains in terms of having enough of the right sized and shaped fields for what people are looking for. So it's great. We have 3 baseball diamonds. Those are pretty much only good for baseball. The outfield of the lighted field does serve as a football field as well for younger kids. But in terms of true multi-purpose fields, we're just at a loss, and we're under constant calls for people seeking additional space. Can I get in my team here? Can I start this program here? You know, those kinds of things. And we just don't have those resources.
So what's coming for that, for looking at that? We've talked about a facility study before, but
Yeah,
for people
so
that are just kind of listening to this,
Facility
you know,
feasibility study is in the works. We've been talking about it for a while, and then there's these conversations of rec advisory. It would be really nice to have a rec advisory council in place when we're doing that study, because there are lots of ways that they could help us reach out to the community, or at least brainstorm on how to reach out to the community and maybe take the lead on some of those things. But the facility feasibility study will be our next thing. I would just, you know, if you had asked me this question like 2 years ago, I would say staffing. And fortunately, we're above and beyond that. I think the last piece of the facilities is our courts overall in Essex Junction, and we talked about this a little bit before, that our basketball and tennis court and pickleball court infrastructure is in serious need of replacement, not repair. And so that means digging those courts up to the sand, and relaying base layers and then starting fresh. We just you can't continue to add asphalt onto cracked pavement the way it is. So that comes at a really significant expense. And so that's something that we're working through right now as well.
and typically those spaces, outdoor spaces are not revenue generators. You don't charge people to show up and
Exactly.
play on an open court.
Completely. No,
Right.
that needs to be completely
Right.
on program fund, capital fund, general fund, lot money, somewhere, grant money. There needs to be other funding sources because
So okay, great. I mean, overall, I think this is really helpful. Marcus, I think I see a hand. Do see
Yeah, I
a
just
hand.
wanted to follow up on that question regarding the facility study. So, and I'm sorry that if I'm not remembering this correctly, but Brad, can you tell me, did we budget for that in this fiscal year? Or is that something that we're gonna have, because I'm assuming that a consultant is gonna need to be part of this particular process, or is this something that we're gonna be budgeting for in the next cycle?
This is something that'll be funded through the program fund.
Okay, so from a timeline standpoint, just if we were to stand up, well, I don't know that it matters if the rec advisory has stood up tonight or not, but what do you think timeline-wise we're looking at to be able to have some results from that, and then be able to discuss what those needs are?
Well, my best guess at the moment would be that if rec advisory at this meeting or some coming meeting goes through, and by late fall, we're able to establish a rec advisory committee, and maybe simultaneously we're able to execute an RFP in order to get a consultant to do this work, then maybe the consultant would be starting, at the tail end of winter or into the spring. It's not a great time in winter to try and draw people out to get feedback about the future of parks and rec and facilities and those things. So it might be more like a springtime start to doing those activities and developing that.
And that process is, that just gets us recommendations at that point, and then after that, it's a large community discussion around, do we agree with them, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, so there's two hopes. One is our master plan is grossly outdated. There's a variety of reasons for that, mostly all of the different iterations of what Parks and Rec looks like in this community in terms of merger, co-location, Parks and Rec district, all the things that we've gone through since that plan has expired. So we need to update the master plan and do a facility feasibility study at the same time. So the results will be, we'll have a new master plan that will give us a 5 or 10 year look of what we should be attempting to achieve, and a facility feasibility study that will say, what are people looking for? What is this community devoid of now? And what are some general ideas of the types of spaces that could alleviate those deficits or interests?
Yeah, so thinking about being landlocked and probably population locked a little bit, and going back to that UMD discussion from gosh knows how many years ago, will that also include, considerations around some of these things may not be able to be done by one small community, but there might need to be some partnerships? I mean, is that like, how would you develop the scope for that exploration?
Yeah, I don't know, Raj. That I think it'll be more more likely that the recommendations will come out that a community of this size would normally, have X, Y, or Z supported facilities, and based on the surveys and the interest group conversations and all of those things, here are the recommendations, and then that's more about the approach of how to get there, right? I don't think the facility feasibility study will be the magic bullet. I think it'll say here's the recommended size and type of facility and services that should be offered. But then how we get there is going to be back to us having that conversation. And so that could be then a recommendation to talk with other communities. I know Colchester's in the process of building something.
Right.
The town, has, I think, in anything I've read, has been talking about all sorts of things in their new endeavor for their new offices. Williston's been in some conversations over the past couple of years about recreation facilities, and I'm not exactly sure where they landed. It's a great idea. It presents all of a whole world of new challenges, not that they can't be overcome.
Right.
Of those, how those MOUs work and who gets access when and what programs. The biggest challenge, especially in Vermont, is that everybody wants access to the same amenities at the same time, right? There's only, winter lasts a really long time here, so gym space is vitally important, and us losing that from the school district is really going to potentially impact what types of programs we have the ability to offer. So gym space is a premium, and of course, you can fill the gym space with pickleballers and some other things during the day, but for the most part, gyms are really not in high demand, at least from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's not till kids get out of school and parents get out of work that they can start coaching teams and get people in there. So it's tricky, you know?
Yep.
Our schools are our largest our largest facilities, period, and publicly supported facilities. And so the lack of access to those, you know, is having a ripple down effect on an increased need for us to have access to our own facilities.
What's the driver behind losing the access? Why are we losing access? What's going on?
I think that's probably more conversation from the school district as to what that explanation is for why some of those changes are forthcoming. I just can't speak for them.
So there will be reductions in the amount of time EGRP can book some of those spaces. That's firm.
Absolutely.
Do you-
As the way it stands today, that,
Okay.
you know, I think they're rolling out these procedures as of the past few months, and so we've offered some feedback for suggestions or hope that there are going to be some changes from what was originally laid out, and that still could happen. So we're being optimistic about that.
Okay, great. Anything else? No? Thank you for that. But don't go anywhere.
I'm
'Cause-
not.
5E is discussion and consideration of Recreation Advisory Council.
Okay, so, you've got a memo in here, that's on page 33, just so folks can find it. And then a, purpose statement for the council, so, we can, take any thoughts, recommendations. You see some highlighted stuff in here, that's certain things that need to be decided. But I think it's pretty straightforward. Brad?
Yeah, you know, it says in the memo, this is completely draft. If you want to cut it all up, if you want to add things, eliminate things, I fully appreciate that this is your committee. This is a committee of the council that's going to be working with EGRP. So please understand, I know there was a comment earlier, this is completely draft and subject to this is at least, rather than the 5 of you sitting around and trying to draft a document, there's at least something for you to just edit, and you could edit it all out if you so choose.
Is this based on the previous rec committee?
It is. So a lot of so the format and a lot of the language is similar in terms of roles and responsibilities, even title as Rec Advisory Council. As you can see, I highlighted up top, Council, Committee, Commission, Board. Regina was questioning, saying the rest of our groups are committees. Why isn't this? It can be. You know, I think it's all up to you.
I pulled up the 2008 last amended May 29, 2014, and a lot of the verbiage is the same. It's just open to discussion where the membership previously was 9. Gives us discretion to 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. A lot of the verbiage around the officers is almost identical. There is termination of membership in the previous one. Any member of the council may be removed at any time by a majority vote of the advisory council. That seems to have fallen out, but it largely is written based off of what previously existed, last amended May 29, 2014.
And in this, Brad, it looks like the youth members also have a vote. Is that true?
Yeah, again, that's how I wrote it in and would recommend to proceed, but that's up to you.
No, I like that.
I think that's important.
Can you describe, like, based on your experience with the last Rec Advisory Council that we had, I got the impression that the members of that committee were very, very involved, not just in coming to meetings and hearing things and making recommendations, but they were out in the community, they were volunteering at events. Is that sort of your expectation with this group?
That's kind of how it's been written in here, is similar to that group, that while we did have meetings and did review all of those things, and that it really was an active body and a real part of recreation. And so I think if that's something that you're interested in supporting, we should leave it in here so that people know the expectation coming in, that this isn't really a group that you just sit around at the meeting and look over the paperwork and provide feedback, that there is involvement. And part of that, Elaine, is the recommendation that this group meet bi-monthly, in knowing that the previous intent, like, we might only meet every other month, but there would be opportunities to be a part of the fall running series races and volunteer at those, or the Halloween hustle or the Halloween event. And so it wouldn't necessarily mean that we're not seeing these people every month, but just that the meeting portion is every other month, and otherwise there's going to be opportunities to participate in other ways.
Do you feel like there needs to be a requirement that some of the members actually use the programs? Is there an assumption that they all do, or do we need to require that?
So when I was going back through this, there's the concept that you could go beyond youth pretty quickly, right? And start to really fill out this council. Like, there needs to be somebody who uses licensed childcare. There needs to be an older adult. There needs to be two youth. There needs to, so you could really start to define that. And I guess I backed away from that a little bit in thinking twofold. One is we don't do that for any other committee.
Yeah.
And so I was starting to feel a little strange to me as to why with recreation do we need to make sure we're hitting all these points? Why don't we have a requirement there's X number of females on committees and other committees, and X number of males and X number of young people and X number of people that have kids? Like, we just don't do that. And two, I was just thinking, if you're interested in being this on the Recreation Advisory Council, then hopefully you have a genuine interest in being on the Recreation Advisory Council, and it shouldn't automatically include you if you have X, Y, or Z, or automatically preclude you from participating if you have X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
That if this is something you want to do, then this is something you can do.
Thanks.
I imagine some of the questions we might get from people that are interviewed for this are, things like, not verbatim, but things like, so just how will I influence aspects of EGRP, and how will my recommendations be? And I don't know how you put that in something like this, but sort of from the industry standard and sort of what other places have done, I don't know how you incorporate that in something like this, right? In the write-up for this, but I think for our purposes, for people that are listening, what's your impression of how that would work for people participating?
Well, I think what we're doing every day is what I was alluding to earlier, is we're coming up with new programs, new processes. How we registered people for summer day camps 6 years ago was different than how we did it 3 years ago, was different than how we did it this past year. Because as things evolve, you need to change. We got to the point at some time where we had people lining up at 6 a.m. in order to register their kids for summer day camps. Yeah, not a fun process, right? So we changed that process, and we went to this call system, which was really great, until we got to the point where we needed to make 500 phone calls, and that was not efficient anymore. So we've moved into this new, So as we're doing those things internally, those are the kinds of things that we would bring to the advisory board is, hey, we're talking about, we have our meeting coming up in December. On the agenda, I would put, we're going to talk about licensed childcare, summer day camp, registration process. And we're going to share the things that we've been brainstorming and batting around as a group, and try and get feedback from you all as community members. Like, how does that sound? Does that sound efficient? Does that sound like it'll work better? Those kinds of things. So I think it's more iterative in terms of the flavor of the day or the week or the month of those things rising to the agenda of, these are the kinds of things that we could use input on, and get your feedback.
Would it go the other way too? opportunities for agenda items for those meetings to come from the group.
Yeah, totally. So I don't even recall what the old standing agendas were, but I think the start of all of those was always, what are you hearing from the community? And so let's talk about it. So that's how we started every meeting, is tell us what you're hearing, tell us what you're thinking, tell us what you're seeing. You saw that newsletter, that flyer, that brochure, you heard about this program, you have a neighbor who has a concern because of this. That's how we started every meeting.
Okay.
And then, I think structurally, what we try to do is somewhat similar to what some things you all have been doing, is that we kind of rotate through our division heads, that the preschool director comes, once a year, and the parks and facilities director comes once a year, and we have those conversations with that group. And then it's items of the day that we have those discussions on.
Thank you. Marcus, I see your hand is up.
Thanks. So I'm going to start with the focus piece of this. I agree that when I first read this, that second paragraph about assisting at recreation-related community events didn't feel good to me. It felt like we were going to, use them to increase our ability to staff these events, versus, and I want to take it to someplace slightly different, which is, I would like this group to participate in those events from the standpoint of being there, having a table, or their primary goal is to get feedback. Their primary goal is to be interacting with the public during those events, because I think that's a good opportunity to again, hear what's happening during programs, during events, and such. So I think that if that is verbalized in that way, I would feel better about the way that it's mentioned here. The other thing, I appreciate you going and talking about the roles and having the right people at the table to have these particular discussions. And I did go down a rabbit hole thinking to myself about all the particular groups that I would like to see at that table. And I still want to see all these particular groups at the table, but based on, again, the programs and the priorities that we have identified over the last couple of years, I really appreciate the fact there's a youth member in this group, but I would like to see us specifically identify a senior member within this group, because again, it's been such a priority and such a focus that I think that would be an important place to be. But I really hope, as we reach out to the community and talk to the community to find people to participate, as with anything, let's go find that representative for families. Let's go find those representative for sports, maybe. I don't know, but whatever that is, we need to bring all the voices we can to this particular table. I'm not saying 20 people at a table, but having that spectrum of experience there at the table to talk about these things broadly and how it impacts these groups and how we can continue to service these groups, I think is extremely important. For me, the other thing that the bi-monthly, and again, this goes back to the earlier point about the rigor, and I'm curious from you, Brad, on a bi-monthly basis, to have that conversation on a bi-monthly basis, is that really an interval that is fast enough for you to continue to feel nimble and flexible in order to, again, work these programs and make them work for the community?
Yes, and I think the other piece is, based on our prior experience, I'm just not a huge fan of meeting to meet. And I don't find that there's probably enough content for every month for us to gather as a recreation advisory council and have a meaningful meeting. And so, I think your concern maybe, Marcus, is that we miss an interval by having bi-monthly, and that's possible. Like something might happen in the 2 months between meetings where we could have had a meeting. I think this leaves it open to adding those meetings or communicating and getting feedback from the council via email and talking to the chair and seeing if they want to create a meeting based on something happening. But I think to set this up to meet monthly, I just fear that people will be showing up and meetings will be short and they'll feel the opposite, that it's not meaningful, that there's not enough to contribute. And so that's where I kind of landed.
I appreciate that logic. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
I'll say something odd and wonder if we, based on our earlier conversation of committees as a whole, if we want to revisit the need for this every such period? Or is that, like 6 years or something? So to move it along, unless there's structural changes to this, I'll start making suggestions for numbers, just because there's some highlighted stuff here. So I'm fine with the bi-monthly. I make the term 2 years. It'd be nice to get some turnover. But none of these are just opinions, right? We can disagree on them. I'd make it 5 adults and 2 youth. I think that was it. The dates are fine with me. The July 1 to June 30th. As far as I don't know really that there's the semantic difference between council, committee, commission, and board. So we tend to call everything else a committee, so we might as well leave it at that. Amber, I'm sorry I didn't see your hand up before, if you were up before I started talking.
You're totally fine. Finish your comments.
That's it.
Okay.
Raj, just can I get
Yeah,
your,
sure.
when you were saying 2 years, were you saying 2 years for both adults and youth? I just wanted to clarify. That was just a separate highlight.
I didn't consider the youth number. That was for adults. It was for all of them, but I didn't consider that a 17-year-old might then become an adult. I guess I don't know why we would do it any different. If they become an adult member, then we'll just look for another youth member if they still want to stick around.
Sure.
Fill their
I
spot.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, I was just asking for which
I
one
love
to
the
circle.
fact that we're having them in as a voting member, and so why do the term any different, I guess? Sorry, Amber, go for it.
No worries. The only comment I was going to make was I agree if we are using the term committee for every other committee, I don't know why we wouldn't use it for this particular committee as well. And I don't disagree with any of the other things that you've said, so I'm on board.
I'm good. My only question would be around the advisory council committee shall communicate directly to the city council on issues of importance and provide at least one annual update. I would really like to hear from them at least more than once. So we can squeeze them in twice a year. We can say at least twice a year so that they're committed to 2 times. It's maybe 6 months or 4 months or some sort of rotation through there so we hear from them more than they're obligated once a year.
I'll just say we don't have that specified
Yeah,
for other committees, which
Okay.
is not saying it's not a
Yeah.
bad idea.
It just since it's in there, it was my only.
Would it make more sense to make that a blanket expectation for committees when we're further down that road? As opposed to
Defining it here.
defining it in each committee's charter?
Okay,
We just,
yeah.
more of I hate to say that we use the word policy, but more of a practice that, as you've already kind of, yeah, I just want to.
Yeah, and the rest of it I'm okay with. I think there's little nuance differences, but the intent is there and it's right, and we can come back and amend this at any point in the future if we find something that isn't working well for us.
I would just make the suggestion that with the membership, if they're going to be staggered, then when you first start out, some folks will be 3 years and some folks will be 2 years, so that you can start the staggering.
Yeah, certainly not one.
Not one.
Nah.
Bi-monthly one, no.
Well, as long, whatever it takes to get
Yeah,
the
yeah.
membership started.
No,
You
but
know,
I'm
if somebody
saying, like-
starts as a 1 year and then the next year they become a 3-year member, or, you know, like, there's ways to, just to
Yeah.
make sure that you have the staggering that you're looking for,
Right.
that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I had suggested 2, just to have some turnover. That might be too short. So if folks prefer 3, I'm not really strongly
No.
attached to 2 or 3 years. I know what you mean about the
Okay.
stagger, but like, if they end up, so if somebody did a 3 and they wanted to re-up, it'd be a 2 after that.
No, that's not what I mean.
Okay.
When you first start a committee and you want to have it staggered, some of your committee, your brand-new committee members, they're all starting at the same time. Some have to do 2, some have to do 3,
Right.
or 1 and 2, or, so that's
Yeah,
just
that was
this
just going
initial.
beyond-
Right.
Yeah, right, I was going beyond that to what the permanent one would be though after that.
If the term length is 2 years, the staggering would be 1 year and 2 years.
Okay.
It would be a little bit confusing to do 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and then
Right.
figure out who is getting back to the 2-year timeframe. But that's, I think that's fine. We can do 1 year and 2 year staggering, or,
And that
And then-
doesn't necessarily have to be in this document,
yeah.
No,
because it's the
right.
first group.
Just by practice, yeah.
And similarly to when the terms run. So if we really can get this up and running much sooner, they're going to start way earlier than July 1, but the regular terms will run on a fiscal year basis normally.
Marcus?
So I agree, committee's fine. I also think, Raj, I think I had the same number in mind as far as the totality of members. But again, I want to emphasize that senior, a position that's specifically there to represent seniors. So I would like to see at least 3 adults, a senior in there, and then a youth or 2. I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with a 2-year term. Obviously you have to start off with, in order to allow the stagger, but I'm okay with 2. I'm also okay with 3. But I would say, just thinking through how this might appear for a youth member, maybe for adults, 2-3 years works, but for a youth, I could absolutely see where that might be a hurdle barrier, just too long, generally speaking. I mean, trying to think back to when I was 13, it's a very long time ago. A year is a pretty significant commitment, and I just wonder if a year for the youth role in comparison would being different than the adult creates a problem, or whether or not that actually helps make it better for those members.
No strong opinions on the term length for either one, for the youth member. I see your point about 2-year commitment.
Doesn't the school board has 2 student members, but one is a junior and one is a senior, right? And then the junior serves 2.
I'm not familiar with their.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that
I think you're right, yeah.
they bring on a junior who serves for 2 years. And then so each year, each student serves 2 years, but it's staggered so that there's a new student coming on each year. I don't know if that's applicable here because we're looking at, you're saying ages 13 to 17, so maybe specifying by grade isn't the best way to do it.
My intention to keep it in the same was just to offer the same respect as an offer for 2 years, and not really taking the thought process, Marcus, that you did, which was probably very accurate. So we could try it with 1 is fine. We can always reappoint them.
I think 2 is very important because so many of our programs are for kids. So having two,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
If we could swing it, I think two would be great.
I mean, if look, if we don't get any applicants, we can ask, we can change it. If we have students dropping out after a year, we can address it, and just figure it out. We can always come back to this. I'm not 100% sold on the senior carve-out. Totally get it. It starts for me to get into like who else. We serve more families with kids than we do technically seniors, supposedly. So it starts to get into, where we draw the line on that. We're also kind of transitioning the thought process from senior citizen to adult programming, which is sort of a wider range. So I don't know now, as somebody who's about to qualify for all of that in 3 short months, if really my perspective is so unique that I need to be carved out for that committee. But
I see that our current programs in the department, the way that we deliver the programming is already carved out that way. We have a variety of youth programming. We've got very specific senior programming, and then we've got everybody else. So I'm kind of looking at it that way, as well as, again, trying to address, we have, as a council, talked about the importance of maintaining senior programming along with everything else. And I just want to make sure that we continue that particular focus. We can continue to have that there. And I agree with you that, because like I said, I can think about 6 different groups right off the top of my head that I want sitting at this table to be represented in order to represent our community. And I'm sure I could go even further with more time. So I just looking at how we're structured now, thinking about how this group would look at those issues and consider those issues, making sure that at least similarly it's carved out in the same way.
Amber?
I was thinking maybe the way that we do this is not to identify the specific groups. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got you.
Okay, sorry. It's saying I'm muted still, weird. Not to identify the specific groups, but to everyone else's point is just say we want 7 members and we encourage all applicants, including students, seniors, etc. And because we don't call this out in any other committees, we don't say, hey, we're looking for seniors, hey, we're looking for youth, though we would absolutely love folks to be applying in all of those different age categories. So maybe that's the way to do it, which would help both sides here. Marcus's point about senior and getting the kids on board.
Fine with that.
And then we have an internal goal ourselves that is, when you're looking at applicants, you literally want to hit 2 kids, you have two youth on the board, but some flexibility too. What if you only get 1 youth that wants to apply?
I'm absolutely open to starting that way, seeing how that goes. I don't
I'm okay with that.
know what other folks think. I mean, not to shut Marcus down either. I just, is there a preference in the group for either one of these? Otherwise, we'll leave it at 7 and make it our responsibility to keep the board made up the way we want it, or this group's responsibility.
I'll simply say as an acknowledgement, and I hear you on the makeup of the other committees, and I'm mindful that on our other committees, I want to see a variety of groups represented. It's also, those other committees don't, I don't know, as I look at UJRP, it in itself and its programming and the way that we have discussed it feels like it's been carved out this way. So that's why I'm looking at this uniquely in comparison to another committee. But I'm very mindful of the fact, in considering applicants for all of our other committees, like, what's that experience? Where does that voice come from? How does it change in that experience, in bringing that experience to the table to those committees? So anyway.
Why don't we try this? Is there anyone online who has, from the public, who has any comment or question or thought on this topic? We'll take a minute for that, and then we'll come back to the discussion as a board. Christine.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate it. I always go back to like purpose and function, and I understand the need of the Recreation Advisory Committee. I wouldn't necessarily name it as advisory. It just doesn't seem advisory to me. It's more of like a working group, which is fine, but it just doesn't seem like an advisory committee. Advisory committees are usually like, there's a necessity to meet every month at least, and the recommendations are coming from the committee, and the things that they're seeing or want to see come from the committee rather than the other way around. And I extend that to the rest of the committees. There's lots of talk of like, well, do we need this one? And this is a subgroup, and I just encourage everybody to, like, instead of we're talking about, well, how many people and when do we meet? What is the purpose and the function? And do we call this one a committee? Do we call it a council? There's terms, and the reason there is a council versus a committee versus an advisory board versus an advisory committee and all of those other terms, it's for the purpose and the function it's trying to serve. So as you lay this all out, and Godspeed in doing that, and I really appreciate your work, I would just look at it through like, what are they trying to achieve, and be really, really clear. And then the name will come, and the who will come, and the where to get them from, and infusing equity into every single aspect of the group. How are you going to do that, rather than just have a separate committee for that? It's just things that I'm thinking as I'm listening to you speak, and I hope that's adding value to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Risa?
Thank you. I agree with everything that Christine just said. In hearing this, and I'm basing some of this on what Marcus said about wanting people at that table who can speak to the community about the various different programs and everything. It sounds a lot to me like it's a recreation ambassadorship program of a way to get people to liaison between the community and this committee. And it, whether it's a committee, a board, whatever, it really sounds like it's recreation ambassadors rather than recreation advisory. And my other comment, I'm gonna stretch for a second because it just disappeared, and it was a really, really good one.
We'll be the judge of that, Risa.
One thing that Brad said that I found very interesting, I'm stretching, but I did find very interesting, was how he talked about needing to be involved and accessible to, with, and by other communities, because in and of itself, we can't necessarily staff 64 basketball players, or, maybe we can. That was something that was brought up regularly regarding the senior center, that we shouldn't be providing services to people who are outside of our area, that it should be just Essex Junction. So as this ambassadorship, advisory, whatever it is going forward, sort of keeping that in mind, that, Brad's point is a really good one. We aren't separate apart. We need to have that sort of interaction. And the other one, it was really good, but it's okay. It'll come up at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Appreciate it. All right, bringing it back to the board. All I think we are on the question of how many members. Is there a specific breakdown? Last suggestion was 7 at large-ish in terms of their makeup, and the council would appoint them as recruited and in a desired makeup that otherwise should probably be listed in this document as a goal. Otherwise, it could vary every year depending on mood. Brad?
I'm totally fine with wherever you all land. The only comment I would offer is that if you truly desire and seek to have a youth member, my best recommendation is to call that out. That's truly unique, and that's not normal. And so when we put things out about the tree advisory committee or the bike walk committee or the planning commission, or there's probably statutes and things with some of those other groups, but that's not something that a normal middle or high school kid is looking at, and nor are we seeking to advertise in the places that they're looking. So we could write in every ad anywhere, students welcome, encouraged, we'd love to hear your voice.
Yeah.
But it's just because it's not normal, it seems to be that the best way to get those representation is to call it out in this document. And again, no judge, if you decide to go 7 at large, that's totally fine. But I think when it comes to youth, that's an important thing to specify.
Total of 7 to include 1 youth member.
Could you guys hear Tim?
I said a total of 7 to include 1 youth member.
How many youth were on the previous rec advisory?
You're gonna ask me hard questions.
I was just wondering if it was a standard or a standing number, or.
I don't recall if it was 1
Okay.
or 2, to be honest.
No worries. It's all right. It was start with 1.
I was skimming the previous
seems to be able to-
document, and
Tim
it's
seems to be able to find
not,
stuff.
it's not called out in the previous document.
I'm suggesting then we start with 1, and because it
And
may
that
be
was a-
difficult to find 2 youth members.
So, sorry, I just did, it was previously 6 adult community representatives, 1 youth, and then 1 member from the Prudential Committee and 1 with the Board of Trustees, but that was due to a separate agreement in terms of having those ex officio seats.
Do we want the council clerk to serve on this?
All right,
A
somebody,
whole different kid.
somebody would have to take over the front porch forum postings.
Oh, really, Mr. Busy? Marcus, what else you got?
A lot of effort goes into those.
Look, I'm fine. It sounds like the majority are in for 7. I agree with the youth identifier. That's perfectly fine. So I'm willing to be on board with that as well. The one thing that I just want to touch on, address, since Raisa brought it up, again, from my standpoint, as I see what I want from this committee, is 2 main factors, which I think through clarity do make this an advisory. I believe that in order for this to be an effective advisory board, though, it needs to do a little bit of outreach, and it needs to be available for feedback. So how that shows up, having that clarity within this message, like I said, that second paragraph just didn't quite have that tone, that feel for me, versus the first paragraph, which I think, again, comes back to this particular committee would be talking about policies, talking about programming, and then bringing that information or working with EJRP staff in order to, again, provide input and feedback from the community to, again, influence policy or influence all these factors. So I just want to make sure that we're clear with the community. I think that if there's that confusion, we just need to, as a group, make sure that that message is clear. I've just acknowledged my intent with this. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about it.
Do you have any suggestion for an edit? I don't want to wordsmith, but if you're not, so I'm just trying to understand what you're,
Could I make a suggestion if you don't? I was just, in listening to your words, Marcus,
Yeah.
in that second part of the focus, Rec Advisory Council members will assist at recreation-related community events and seek to engage and involve. So adding the words engage and involve, so that piece is clear. I think the other part, as I hear you talk, Marcus, that's to me the most important word about the word liaison, is that you're really connecting those two, the community and the recreation department. So that to me kind of covers that role, that you're a liaison, that you're doing what Raj said earlier, that you're sharing what you and your neighbors and fellow residents are experiencing with the rec department, and you're hearing what they're doing and bringing that back to those folks too. That it's a two-way street.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you there because, as I said, I believe that this latter half feels kind of like in the same way that the community board is with the police department. There's that interaction, there's that liaison portion. But again, unlike that particular board, this one, we'll be talking about policies, we'll be talking about programs and talking about, again, and continuing that feedback loop with staff. So thank you. I think that clarity, if that clarity of language is in here, I think that's great. Sorry, I'm not very good with impromptu writing.
it's fine.
And Raj, I feel bad adding this, but there isn't a sentence in here that states that the membership shall be residents of the city of Essex Junction. And so if that's something that is of importance to you all, then I would suggest we add that sentence in. If it's not of importance, then we don't need to. I was just noting that it's not there.
I would think that since this is a advisory committee that is a committee of the council, we would want them to be Essex Junction residents.
Just thinking of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's start there. Okay. Is that,
Can I summarize?
sure. I don't know.
Hopefully.
2-year term for all members, youth or regular. Bi-monthly meetings are okay. 5 adults, 1 youth.
6 adults, 1 youth.
6 adults, 1 youth.
Or
7 total.
right.
seven
Seven
total,
members.
minimum 1 youth,
6 adults, minimum 1 youth. Right.
or
Well,
7 members, minimum 1 youth. What do you, if we can find 2, that's great, but,
7
Yeah, at
members,
least.
minimum 1 youth.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay. We're going to call this a committee. July 1 to June 30th term. Residents, members shall be residents of the city. We're going to edit, we're going to include to engage as well in that second sentence of the focus part.
Mhm.
Yes.
And I think the only ones that, these weren't highlighted, Regina, but down in the voting section, if it's 7, I'm assuming that we want 4 votes for an affirmative vote and 4 for a quorum.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
Start date,
July.
do we want to wait till July 1st, or can we start this soon, start recruiting as soon as we approve it?
Oh yeah, July 1st was 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What month are we in?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that if you all approve
Yes.
this with these language changes, that
Yeah.
we'll get something together in the next 2 weeks and get it out there.
I was
Okay.
honestly thinking we were, I don't know what time it is, but I thought we
April.
were way later in the year for some reason right now. Way later, like, where's my coat later? Which means we have to go. So I'm going to find the memo.
And we reserve the right to amend this at any point in the future, so.
What makes
okay.
us so powerful.
Wonderful. Just want to make sure. The motion is here. And it-
So, Regina, was that, do you have everything you think you need from us then?
I believe so.
Okay. Tim, if you're ready.
It says, I move that we adopt the Essex Junction Recreation and Park Advisory Committee purpose statement with the council's suggested edits.
Second.
Any further comment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Regina.
I'm very glad
Thank you.
we've gotten to this. Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks for coming in, Brad.
Sure. 5G, approve amended minutes from August 14th, 2024.
So if it helps, I can just read
Sure.
the amendments. So this is essentially to section 4A, the comments from the public and specifically from Stephen Eustace. I think the easiest way to do this is just read it. So it should say, Stephen Eustace spoke about 4, that's a change, properties on South and West is a change, streets, not mowing grass along the sidewalks. Then the edits pick up further down on the sentence. He suggested that the city mail letters to property owners on Wilkinson, Tyler, and Hayden Drive, that's a change, who have planning commission required, is the change, Ash Street is the change, trees on their properties that are along the sidewalk is the change, to notify them that they should take the trees down.
He emailed those edits.
He
Yes.
emailed
Yeah.
those edits.
Yeah, they're very clear.
Yep.
And I can forward these on to our trustee minute taker if you folks are up for those edits.
I move that we approve the minutes from August 14th, 2024 as amended.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Great. Minutes are amended. Excellent. Consent agenda. There's a letter of support for Regina to attend some local government institute training. I
Motion to
move-
approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Marcus can have that. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Great, thank you. Manager report, council comments?
Manager report, so the second annual greatest tree concert contest is happening. What did I just say?
Concert.
Oh my gosh.
Which I would pay to see.
That brings up a whole never mind.
Tree concert?
Oh, gosh.
So the Tree Advisory Committee is hosting this. It's aimed at celebrating trees and their significance to the community. So the contest invites residents to nominate a tree. It's open from September 1st to the 30th, and there is an online form available on our website or at the city offices at 2 Lincoln, at Brownell, or at EJRP Parks and Rec. And the paper forms can be returned to the city offices here at 2 Lincoln. Also, just want to let folks know that Chelsea hosted a tour of the Water Resource Recovery Facility, previously known as the wastewater treatment plant, to the Williston Select Board. They had requested a tour for their regularly scheduled meeting to better understand the facility. So they had 6 people attend, 3 board members, the town manager, public works director, and 1 resident. So that's awesome that she was able to do that. And that's it.
Great. I do not have anything. It's kind of late. I think I did have something, and honestly, I cannot remember. I apologize. But I'll save it for next time. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.
Good night, guys.